The interpretations of the office have varied virtually with each office holder. The Founding Fathers created the presidency as one of the three divisions of federal power within the framework of the Constitution. One observation of that arrangement from President Dwight Eisenhower made shortly after leaving office.
The president, by the Constitution, is the head of the executive branch. It is his duty to execute the laws of the land. They're passed by Congress, they're interpreted by the law, by the judges and the Supreme Courts, but the president is the one that has to execute them. And in an extreme case, he can even call upon the armed forces, as I did in Little Rock, not to participate in the struggles that were going on then between those who were for integration and those who were not, but to make certain that no organized or unorganized resistance in any place could interfere with the carrying out of the proper orders of a federal judge.
President Franklin Roosevelt visualized himself one member of a three-horse team representing the American form of government. Roosevelt developed this analogy in a radio address in which he scolded the Supreme Court for opposing some of the sweeping changes advocated in the president's New Deal.
Last Thursday, I described the American form of government as a three-horse team provided by the Constitution to the American people so that their field might be plowed. The three horses are, of course, the three branches of government: the Congress, the executive, and the court. Two of the horses, the Congress and the executive, are pulling in unison today. The third is not. Those who have intimated that the President of the United States is trying to drive that team overlook the simple fact that the President, as chief executive, is himself one of the three horses. It is the American people themselves who are in the driver's seat. It is the American people themselves who want the furrow plowed.
While Roosevelt saw the president's role as workhorse, Eisenhower compared it to being a mountain sheep. The 34th president made that observation in a 1961 interview as he described the many demands of the office.
The president has to be concerned with everything that happens to any human in the United States and often abroad. He, therefore, has visitors who come into his office who jump from, let's say, a discussion of the situation in Laos, and the next one may come in and introduce the teacher of the year. Then comes maybe a half a dozen boys of the explorer movement in the Boy Scouts, so that one of the things about the presidency is the way you have to be prepared to jump just like a mountain sheep from one jag to another jag, and you're always on the alert. You have to be.
Another expression of presidential duties, 1937, a fireside chat to the nation, Franklin Roosevelt.
Anyone charged with proposing or judging national policies should have first-hand knowledge of the nation as a whole. That is why, again this year, I have taken trips to all parts of the country. For a president especially, it is a duty to think in national terms. He must think not only of this year, but of future years, when someone else will be president. He must not let the country be deceived by a merely temporary prosperity, which depends on wasteful exploitation of resources which cannot last. He must think not only of keeping us out of war today, but also of keeping us out of war in generations to come.
The president's hardest task? This is how Lyndon Johnson once defined it in an address to Congress.
Many of you in this chamber are among my oldest friends. We have shared many happy moments and many hours of work. And we've watched many presidents together. Yet only in the White House can you finally know the full weight of this office. The greatest burden is not running the huge operations of government, or meeting daily troubles, large and small, or even working with the Congress. A president's hardest task is not to do what is right, but to know what is right. Yet the presidency brings no special gift of prophecy or foresight. You take an oath, you step into an office, and you must then help guide a great democracy.
The powers of the presidency, as defined in the Constitution, are broadly stated. John Quincy Adams, the sixth man to be president, said after leaving office, "I found no article in the Constitution of the United States delegating the right to define or limit what are or are not the constitutional powers of the president." That situation has led to some conflicting interpretations. For example, Section 2 of Article 2 of the Constitution states, "The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states." This presidential mandate to be Commander-in-Chief has been widely interpreted to include all powers which may be necessary to wage war. Yet the same Constitution stipulates that only Congress shall have the power to declare war. During the past 2 decades, hundreds of thousands of Americans have been involved in military actions, most notably in Korea and Indochina, without any formal declaration of war by Congress. There are those who argue that this is in violation of the checks and balance system which the Founding Fathers had built into the Constitution. President Eisenhower touched on this issue in an interview in which he appraised presidential powers to deal with Cold War problems.
Now, when we've been in real emergencies, that is, the acute emergencies of war, almost automatically the president has to assume powers that otherwise he would never attempt to exercise. Sometimes these powers are given specifically by the Congress, but often they are not. For example, recognizing that the Cold War sometimes heats up to the point almost of a direct crisis. We have the cases of Formosa and the Mideast. In both these cases, I went to the Congress and asked for their specific authority to take certain action under certain conditions. Now, this meant, by and large, that under those conditions, our armed forces would be at war. In other words, Congress gave to the president almost the power of declaring war, but under a given set of conditions.
The Cold War turned into a killing war in Indochina during the Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon administrations. Lyndon Johnson secured authority to wage this war in a congressional resolution which was prompted by events later disputed. Here is one Johnson statement on his power as Commander-in-Chief.
The President of the United States is not about to commit forces and undertake actions to deter aggression in South Vietnam, to prevent this communist conspiracy, unless and until the American people through their Congress sign on to go in. If the President's going in, as he may be required to do, he wants the Congress to go in right beside it.
When, in 1970, American troops fighting in Vietnam were ordered into neighboring Cambodia, President Nixon explained why he had not first sought congressional authority for this action.